I still can't believe how everything fell apart so quickly. One minute I was finally living my truth, embracing the woman I was always meant to be, and the next minute my controlling husband destroyed everything. Even now, lying in this hospital bed with my jaw wired shut, I know none of this was my fault. I was just trying to be happy for once in my miserable life. It all started 4.5 months ago when I got that job at the marketing firm in downtown Denver. After 11 years trapped at home, playing the perfect little housewife to Mason, I finally had something that was mine. The job wasn't much, just part-time administrative work, but it represented freedom. Freedom from the suffocating suburban life in Castle Rock. Freedom from pretending I was satisfied with PTA meetings and soccer practices. Freedom from a husband who thought bringing home a paycheck meant he owned me. The women at work understood me in a way Mason never could. Henrietta, Patricia, and Nicole weren't like the mindless suburban moms I'd been forced to socialize with for over a decade. They were real. They spoke truth about how men systematically oppressed women, how marriage was just legalized slavery, how we deserved to live our lives without being controlled by anyone. When Henrietta invited me out for drinks that first Friday, I felt like I'd finally found my tribe. Henrietta was everything I wanted to be, divorced, independent, taking no crap from anyone. She'd grown up in Boston, survived an abusive marriage, and came out stronger. Her stories about her ex-husband made my blood boil. The way men think they can control us, own us, mold us into their perfect little dolls. She opened my eyes to how I'd been living the same way, just with prettier wrapping paper. Mason hated them from the start, of course. He called them hardcore feminists and professional victims, just because they refused to accept the patriarchal BS that society forced on us. He'd roll his eyes when I came home excited about our conversations, dismissing my newfound awareness as nonsense. But what else could I expect from a man who thought he was being generous by allowing me to work part-time? The conditioning ran deep. For years, I'd accepted his subtle controls without question. The way he'd check the bank statements, questioning every purchase. The way he'd call during the day to check in, but really to monitor where I was. The way he'd plan our weekends without asking, assuming I'd go along with whatever he wanted. I'd been so brainwashed that I thought this was love. I remember once, about 3 years into our marriage, I'd signed up for an evening art class at the community college. When I told Mason, excited about finally having something creative in my life, he'd gotten this look. Not angry exactly, but disappointed. "Don't you think you should have discussed this with me first?" he'd said. "What about dinner? What about when I need to work late?" I'd canceled the class the next day, telling myself it was because we couldn't afford it. But really, it was the way he'd made me feel selfish for wanting 2 hours a week to myself. The first time I stood up to him, about 2 months after starting the job, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head. All I'd done was point out how his helping with dinner was actually just him expecting praise for doing the bare minimum. The fight that followed was apocalyptic. He kept saying pathetic things like, "I haven't done anything bad to you," and "the only thing I'm guilty of is loving you." God, the manipulation was so transparent, as if love meant ownership, as if I owed him my entire life just because he paid most of the bills. That night, I texted Henrietta about the fight. She responded immediately with a voice message. "Girl, that's classic gaslighting. He's trying to make you feel guilty for having standards. Don't let him manipulate you." Patricia jumped in with her own story about how her ex used to do the same thing. The support was intoxicating. Finally, women who understood. The truth was, I'd been dying inside for years. 37 years old, and what did I have to show for it? 2 kids I never really wanted, a house in the suburbs that felt like a prison, and a husband who thought missionary position twice a month was keeping the romance alive. Meanwhile, he got to travel for work, have an actual career, come home to a clean house and hot dinner without ever appreciating the sacrifice I made. I remember the exact moment I decided to take control. I was folding Mason's underwear, 37 years old and folding another person's underwear like a servant, when I realized I'd never had an orgasm with him, not once in 11 years. He'd finish in 3 minutes, roll over satisfied, while I lay there wondering if this was all life had to offer. The thought made me so angry I threw his clothes across the room. Henrietta opened my eyes to what I was missing. She told me about her own journey to freedom, how she'd divorced her controlling ex and was now living life on her terms. She made me realize that I didn't have to apologize for wanting more. Patricia and Nicole had similar stories. They were survivors who refused to be victims anymore. The first night I didn't come home at all was liberating. Mason called and texted frantically, but I ignored him. I was at a club with my friends, dancing like I hadn't danced in years, feeling alive for the first time since my 20s. When I finally got home after 2 a.m., drunk on both alcohol and freedom, he was waiting up like some kind of prison warden. The accusation in his eyes made me furious. How dare he question me? How dare he act like I'd committed some crime by having a life outside of him? That's when I met Henry. He was everything Mason wasn't. Spontaneous, exciting, dangerous. 6'3", with arms covered in tattoos and a smile that promised trouble. When he bought me a drink at the bar and told me I was too beautiful to look so sad, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. He didn't care that I was married. He said marriage was just a piece of paper, that real connection transcended legal bonds. When he kissed me in the parking lot, I didn't feel guilty. I felt powerful. Henry worked construction, and his hands were rough in a way Mason's soft office hands never were. The first time we were together, in his truck behind the club, he made me feel things I didn't know were possible. It was raw, primal, everything my sterile marriage wasn't. He didn't treat me like some fragile housewife. He grabbed my hair, told me exactly what he wanted, made me feel desired in a way that set my whole body on fire. The affair was intoxicating. Henry made me feel 25 again. He introduced me to experiences Mason would never understand. The first time I tried Molly with him, the world exploded into sensation and color. Sex became transcendent, not the routine chore it was with Mason. We'd meet at his apartment during my lunch breaks, in hotel rooms that Henrietta helped me book, anywhere we could steal moments together. I deserved this. I deserved to feel alive. But Henry wasn't enough. Once I'd tasted freedom, I wanted more. There was also Kevin from accounting. He was married too, trapped like I was. We understood each other. Our encounters were pure physical release, no strings attached. His wife was pregnant with their 3rd kid, and he needed escape as much as I did. We'd meet during lunch breaks, quick and passionate in his car or a nearby hotel. It was exactly what I needed, validation that I was still desirable, still worthy of passion. Kevin was different from Henry. Where Henry was rough and demanding, Kevin was almost worshipful. He'd spend entire lunch hours just pleasuring me, amazed that a woman like me would want him. His wife had stopped touching him after their 2nd kid, he said. She'd gotten fat, lazy, only cared about the children. I understood that suffocation. We were saving each other. And then there was Antonio, the bartender at our favorite club. He was younger, maybe late 20s, with that Latino fire that made me weak. With him, I felt like a completely different person. Not a suburban mom, not someone's wife, just a woman taking what she wanted from life. He'd do things to me in the storage room of the club that would make Mason faint if he knew. Sometimes I'd come home with my underwear in my purse, still trembling from what Antonio had done to me, and serve Mason dinner like nothing had happened. The secret knowledge made me feel invincible. The fact that all 3 men were in my life at once made me feel more powerful than I'd ever felt. I was desired, wanted, needed by multiple men while Mason sat at home, clueless, thinking his once-a-month missionary duty was keeping me satisfied. Sometimes I'd be texting Henry while Mason watched TV, setting up our next encounter while my oblivious husband sat 3 feet away. The thrill was almost as good as the sex itself. Henrietta taught me to delete messages and use apps that hid conversations, every way to maintain my freedom while keeping Mason in the dark. Men have been doing this forever, she said. Why should we deny ourselves? She was right. Why should I be faithful to someone who saw me as property? She even showed me how to use certain positions and tricks to hide that I'd been with other men. Shower immediately, use this spray, do your Kegels, she instructed. Men are too stupid to notice if you're careful. The drugs started innocently enough. Henrietta said a little meth would help me keep up with everything. Work, kids, multiple lovers, maintaining the facade at home. She was right. Suddenly I had energy for everything. I could fuck Henry for hours, come home and clean the entire house, help with homework, and still have energy to sneak out after Mason fell asleep. It was like a superpower. When I found out I was pregnant, my first thought wasn't panic. It was annoyance. Of course this would happen now, just when I was finding myself. The timing made it impossible to know who the father was. Mason and I had been intimate a few times that month, but I'd also been with Henry and Kevin around the same time. With Henry, I usually made him pull out, but there were a few times when we were high and careless. Kevin always wore protection, but condoms weren't foolproof. The uncertainty should have terrified me, but instead it thrilled me. Another form of freedom. The baby could be anyone's, which meant it was truly mine. I told Henrietta first. She laughed and said I should make Mason raise it regardless. Men have been tricking women into raising their bastards for centuries, she said. Consider it reparations. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But what if he finds out? What if what? Henrietta cut her off, her voice sharp. She deserves financial security after everything he's put her through. Don't go soft on us now, Pat. Nicole nodded enthusiastically. Henrietta's right. Make him pay. It's the least he can do. Patricia looked down at her drink, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Doubt? Fear? But then she looked up and forced a smile. Of course. You're right. Make him pay. The plan was simple. Act normal. Let Mason believe it was his. Secure my financial future. If he was going to insist on traditional gender roles, then he could play the traditional role of provider while I lived my truth. But then Henry ended things when I told him about the pregnancy. He suddenly wasn't so free-spirited when faced with potential consequences. I can't do a baby, he said, backing away from me like I was diseased. My ex already has 2 of mine. I can't afford another. The coward blocked my number that same night. Kevin ghosted me completely. Even Antonio became distant, suddenly too busy to meet during his breaks. Men were all the same, happy to use you for fun, but gone the second things got real. It only reinforced what Henrietta had been teaching me. Never depend on men, only use them for what they can provide. The pregnancy was miserable. Playing the happy, expectant mother for Mason while knowing the truth was exhausting. He was so pathetically excited, painting the nursery, reading baby books, cutting back on work travel to be home more. If only he knew he might be preparing for another man's child. The thought gave me a thrill, even as morning sickness made me miserable. Sometimes I'd imagine his face if he knew that, while he was painting teddy bears on the walls. The baby might have been conceived in Henry's truck or during a lunch break with Kevin. I managed to hide my lifestyle for months. The drugs helped with the boredom and frustration of pregnancy. Henrietta had connections, and a little meth here and there made the endless days bearable. It also helped me keep the weight off. Can't have Mason wondering why I wasn't gaining enough baby weight. I was careful, only using when he was at work, always having an excuse for where I'd been. The high made me feel like myself again, not this bloated incubator I'd become. When the baby was born, Mason's reaction told me everything. He stood there, refusing to hold her, barely looking at her. He knew. Somehow he knew. When he mentioned wanting a DNA test, I tried to play it off, act shocked and hurt. How dare he accuse me? What kind of woman did he think I was? But inside I was calculating. Even if the test proved he wasn't the father, I could still make this work. I'd seen other women do it. What I didn't expect was for him to know everything. Every detail. He knew about Henry, Kevin, even how long the affairs had lasted. As he laid out the evidence in front of his mother and mine, I felt the walls closing in. But I wasn't going to grovel. I wasn't going to apologize for taking control of my life. If he couldn't handle a modern woman who refused to be owned, that was his problem. When he left the hospital, taking his sanctimonious anger with him, I felt relief mixed with rage. How dare he abandon me at my most vulnerable? How dare he make this all about him? I had just given birth and he was making it about his wounded male ego. Typical men. They want you to birth their children but abandon you the second you show any independence. The DNA test results only confirmed what that bastard already knew. He wasn't the father. So what? He'd been playing daddy for 9 months. What difference did biology make? But no, his pride mattered more than our family. He served me with divorce papers while I was still recovering from childbirth. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. What followed was a systematic campaign to destroy me. He turned my family against me, painted me as some kind of monster. My own mother looked at me with such disappointment. But she didn't understand. She was from a different generation, one that accepted being slaves to men. I was fighting for my freedom, and sometimes freedom required casualties. The restraining order was pure manipulation. He claimed I was a danger to our son because of my anti-male views, as if teaching a boy that women deserved respect and autonomy was dangerous. He wanted full custody, wanted to erase me from my children's lives just because I refused to be the submissive wife he wanted. I moved in with my parents temporarily, but their conditions were insufferable. They wanted me to give up my friends, go to therapy, act like I had some kind of problem. The problem wasn't me. It was a society that couldn't handle a woman living freely. The confrontation happened in their pristine living room, the same room where I'd announced my engagement to Mason 12 years earlier. My mother sat on the edge of her floral couch, hands folded, looking at me like I was a stranger. "Amanda, honey," she began, her voice trembling. "We love you, we want to help, but you need to get clean. You need to see a therapist. You need to—" "I need to what?" I interrupted. "Apologize? Beg Mason to take me back? Play the perfect little wife again?" My father, who'd been silent until then, slammed his hand on the coffee table. "You need to think about your children. When was the last time you even asked about them?" The question hung in the air. I couldn't remember. The drugs made everything fuzzy, but even without them, thinking about my kids was like pressing on a bruise. It was easier not to. "They're better off without me," I said, the words tasting like ash. My mother started crying then, these quiet, hopeless tears. "How can you say that? How can you—" She couldn't finish. "Either you accept our help on our terms," my father said, his voice cold now, "or you leave. Those are your only options." I looked at them. These people who claimed to love me but couldn't accept who I'd become. Their love came with conditions, with chains, just like Mason's had. "Then I'll leave," I said, standing up. My mother reached for me, but I pulled away. "Your conditions are just another prison. I'm done being controlled." When Mason refused to see reason, refused to accept an open marriage that would benefit us both, I knew I had to take drastic action. The night I went to the hotel with Sam, another guy I'd met through Patricia, was supposed to be about reclaiming my power. Mason had spies everywhere, probably tracking my phone, trying to control me even after I'd left. But I didn't care. Let him see that I was thriving without him. Let him know that other men wanted what he threw away. When Sam's wife showed up at the hotel room, screaming and filming everything, I realized Mason had orchestrated it all. He'd turned me into some kind of pariah, made me the villain in his twisted narrative. The video she took, me half-dressed and humiliated, became his weapon to destroy me completely. But even then, I refused to break. My friends rallied around me, reminding me that this was just patriarchal oppression in action. Mason was threatened by my independence, by my refusal to conform. The fact that he was poisoning our children against me, telling them Mommy doesn't want to be a family anymore, just proved how low he would sink. The drugs helped me cope with the injustice of it all. What started as occasional use became daily necessity. Meth made everything clearer, helped me see the conspiracy against me. Mason, the lawyers, even my own parents, they were all part of a system designed to break strong women like me. Henrietta understood. She'd been through the same thing with her ex-husband. The meeting with the lawyers should have been my moment of triumph. Mason was offering $60,000 for a quick divorce. Finally, some compensation for 11 years of imprisonment. I signed immediately, not bothering to read the details. Why would I? I was getting paid and getting free. Let him raise the kids he wanted so badly. I had a life to live. But the money never came. The hearing happened without me. I had more important things to do than perform for their kangaroo court. By then, the drugs were everything. Henrietta had introduced me to people who could help fund our lifestyle. If society wanted to treat us like whores anyway, why not get paid for it? At least it was honest work, unlike pretending to love someone for financial security like I'd done with Mason. The night of the accident blurred like a fever dream. We were celebrating something. I couldn't remember what. Henrietta was driving my car, or Mason's car, technically, since he paid for it like he never let me forget. We were high, drunk, feeling invincible. The crash into that house felt like slow motion. Patricia went through the windshield. There was so much blood. The police, the arrest, the drugs they found. It all blended into a nightmare of flashing lights and handcuffs. Even then, sitting in that jail cell, I knew this was Mason's fault. If he had just accepted who I was, if he had let me be free, none of this would have happened. His obsessive need to control me had driven me to this. When no one would bail me out, when my parents demanded I meet their conditions for help, I saw the truth. They were all part of it. They wanted me broken, submissive, apologizing for daring to want more from life. Even my so-called friends abandoned me when I needed them most. Mason had probably gotten to them too, turned them against me with his lies. The beating came out of nowhere. The women I'd thought were my allies turned on me, blaming me for Henrietta's arrest, as if I had any control over what Mason did with information he stole by spying on my phone. They broke my jaw, knocked out teeth, left me bleeding on a bathroom floor. And still, no one cared, no one visited. Even the nurse looked at me with pity instead of understanding. Mason came to the hospital playing the concerned ex-husband. The hypocrisy made me sick. He'd destroyed my life, turned my children against me, left me with nothing, and now he wanted to act like he cared? I could barely look at him. When I told him I was sorry I'd ruined everything, I meant I was sorry I'd ever married him in the first place. The drugs were the only thing that made sense anymore. They numbed the pain, made me forget what I'd lost, or maybe what I'd thrown away. No, I didn't throw anything away. It was taken from me by a man who couldn't handle a woman who refused to be owned. When I got out of the hospital, I had nothing. No home, no children, no friends, no money. My parents' conditional love came with chains I refused to wear. The streets were better than surrendering my autonomy. At least there, I was free to make my own choices, even if those choices were slowly killing me. The overdose wasn't planned exactly. I'd scored some pills from a guy who hung around the shelter. They were supposed to help me sleep, help me forget the cold and the hunger and the voice in my head that sometimes sounded like my daughter asking why Mommy didn't love her anymore. I wrote Mason a note, not because I wanted forgiveness, but because I wanted him to know what he'd done. He'd won. He'd broken me. Are you happy now? Waking up in the hospital again was the cruelest joke of all. They'd pumped my stomach, brought me back to a life I didn't want. My father was there, legal papers in hand, guardianship, another man taking control of my life. They were sending me to rehab, forcing me to get help for a problem they'd created, The rehab center was just another prison. Group therapy sessions where they wanted me to admit I was an addict, take responsibility for my choices, apologize for the harm I'd caused. But why should I apologize? I was the victim here. Everything that happened was because Mason couldn't accept who I really was. They kept me sedated most of the time and said it was for my own good. The days blurred together. Therapy, meetings, medications, repeat. They wanted me to write letters to my children, to Mason, to everyone I'd hurt. But what about my hurt? What about the life stolen from me? I found the pills hidden in another patient's room. She owed me for covering for her during room check. Just a few, she said, to take the edge off. They looked stronger than usual, but I didn't care. Anything to escape the endless cycle of being told I was wrong, sick, broken. I swallowed them all at once, sitting in the bathroom stall where no one could stop me. This time I'd make sure they couldn't bring me back. This time I'd finally be free from Mason, from judgment, from a world that couldn't accept a woman who refused to conform. As the drugs hit my system, as my vision blurred and my heart raced, I thought about my children. For just a moment, I wondered if maybe... But no. They were better off without me. Mason had made sure of that. He'd won completely, turned them against me so thoroughly that they didn't even ask about me anymore. The pain in my chest felt like justice finally delivered. At last, something that made sense. I'd lived on my terms, and I'd die on them too. Let Mason explain this to our children. Let him carry the guilt of driving me to this. In the end, I was right about everything. Marriage was a prison, men were controlling, and the only true freedom came from refusing to play by their rules. My name was Amanda Mitchell, and I was finally free.